How's it going out there, my three most favorite viewers in the whole wide world? Coming at you again with some daddy love. Like I said, even if I netted one view on this, I'm pretty sure which views it was. Um, like always, just 1 second. The landscaping people are here today, so kind of have to minimize the sound of their buzzing. But I do realize in the first video, kiddies, we spoke about your grandfather. We spoke about a few many things. I'm leaving this also really open for part two because I do realize that I may have left out some parts in part one. So today we're going to be talking about your Papa Big Manuel Senior, Manuel Giddens Senior. His real name was Manuel Leonard. His father, my grandfather, was actually a preacher, and his name was James Albert Leonard. And I'm going to go ahead and give you a brief story about your great-great-grandfather, Pastor Leonard. He still is a very predominant man in Florida. Matter of fact, in like the late 40s and even like the early 50s, your great-great-grandfather found Jesus, and he ended up founding a ministry and ended up making a ministry, and he was end up making like sermons, and he would preach to the people in the poor places of Tampa, Florida, also known as Skid Row. He would preach to these people, and he would preach to the downtrodden. He would preach to to the people that were down and out, that were struggling with addictions, that were struggling with alcohol, that were sleeping on the streets, and he'd preach to them, and he founded a ministry. It's the Lighthouse Gospel Mission in Tampa, Florida. It's actually still founded to this very day. You can look it up on the website. It's the Lighthouse Gospel Ministry, and they still save people, and they still preach on about especially about what Pastor Leonard, my grandfather, your great-great-grandfather. They still talk about how Pastor Leonard was definitely a staple of Tampa, Florida's community. I'm actually pleased to know that I have the lineage of a great preacher, a man of God. And his ministry still stands to this very day. I still have to go there. I want to visit it someday, and someday I'll get some footage of that for you kiddos out there. And it's not like I failed to mention in the first one. I was just so much on a buzz to get that video out so I can explain to you children that there is, some great men that I should have explained a long time ago. But I know Aaliyah, she was old enough for me to explain, and she knows a little bit about she knows a little bit about her grandfather Manuel. And the little ones, y'all are probably too little to explain at the time, but I think now is the perfect time, especially with my little looters and my little nine-eye. Hopefully they're paying attention. A little wink. But no, your great-great-grandfather, Pastor Leonard, was a great man, and is definitely a staple to Florida community. As a Floridian myself, I have roots here in Florida that go deep, and like my father, I too was given a choice to become a man of God with with fire in my veins for the Lord that I still have, and I still praise the Most High on my journey. But let's get into your grandfather. He actually had a decision where he could either be a pastor or he could be a working man that's centered on self-growth and self-mastery. And your grandfather Manuel chose his own road. Don't get it twisted. His faith in the Lord was very, very vast. I got up to pictures because I realized last time the photographs really couldn't tell too much. But this one right here, like your grandfather, he was a working man's working man, and that's where I get my working ethic is from your grandfather. This is him out there on the roof, but your grandfather, he chose his own path, and he was like he would definitely be out of the bright mind where even when he was like your age, like Aviana's age, my dad was picking up and collecting Coke bottles. Him and his brother, my Uncle James, your great Uncle James, they would be like pals together. They'd go through the neighborhood collecting Coke bottles. They would actually get a newspaper route. A newspaper route is back when children, had jobs, and they would actually deliver newspaper, and they would, deliver newspaper from house to house. They'd have a schedule of which houses to deliver to, and they'd deliver the newspaper. Some would deliver on bicycles. Some would stand on street corners with stacks of newspapers. There were actually kids that were like as young as like 9 years old that used to have newspaper jobs. I actually had a job when I was about, when I was like 5, 6, 7, and 8 years old. When I was in elementary school, I used to be a grader on the line with Dad and my mom, and I would actually grade vegetables and cucumbers and peppers, and and I had my own little job. But Dad, even when he was a kid, he'd wheel around a cart or a wagon, and him and Uncle James would either sell newspapers, and they'd gather glass bottles back then. Now, gathering glass bottles kind of like died out when I was starting to become, a kid. But me and my cousin James, we'd actually collect glass bottles and take them to the Cumberland farms, and we would get about 5 to 10 cents each on glass bottles, and that was kind of our hustle on how to make money in the 80s. We'd have our own little radio flyer, little red wagon, and we'd go around the neighborhood collecting soda pop bottles, Mountain Dew bottles. This is back when soda was actually in glass bottles instead of plastic ones, and we'd go around and we'd collect them, and we'd take them to the convenience store, and we'd get some money for them for exchanging them back. And Dad and Uncle James, your grandfather, they would have all these kinds of ways to make kind of money. And Uncle James, the produce business, my dad ended up taking it over, and your grandfather would be like the biggest produce salesman from all the way from here to Florida all the way to New York, hands down. He would know the best way to run a crew, to assemble people, to get people that would get to work for him. Him and my mother, your grandmother Martha, they were an awesome team together, and they would work the season. And when they were working the seasons, I was right alongside of yours truly. It was kind of like crazy how many times I would switch schools, but I kind of adjusted to it because I knew I was working with family. Other photographs, there's Dad again. He's got the nails in his mouth. I actually do that too whenever I have to use like a drill or something. Always emphasizing you gotta wear a helmet when you're out there on the job site. You gotta have that hard hat. And Dad's out there in that Florida sun, and you definitely need a towel whenever you're dealing with that type of weather. And Dad was a worker. You could ask anything, you can ask anyone about him. Dad was all about that work. There's your grandmother when she was young. Dad would, he would definitely put in his all, and he was definitely a man of family. He was definitely a man who had many, many friends. Matter of fact, if you were here in Southwest Florida, and if you knew, if you were to ask some of his friends that are still kicking around, they'll tell you some stories about Big Manuel. But thing is here in part 2 a little bit on how he lived. We lived together as a unit. Your grandfather and I, we were practically inseparable. He taught me how to do the produce business route. There's me actually posing right in front of the beach in front of one of our customers before I went in to go do a sale. There's Dad. He was actually the one taking the picture that day, taking a picture of me right there on Fort Myers Beach. I actually still go there and go catch fish every now and again. But yeah, that was me in my teenage years. Dad, he was always the cheerleader, and the thing is that, that's kind of like how I am with you girls. I may not be there with you all the time, but I'm here, and I resonate, and I hear y'all as well. And with your grandfather, him and I were so close that he would understand me. He was a very, very kind soul, and the thing is I lost him in a very important year, because in 2010 your grandfather passed away, and it left me very, very sad. And it even left me with thoughts that where I didn't even feel like I wanted to carry on. But those thoughts were put to rest, because in 2010 I also received news that I was going to be a father, and that's where I get my little lumpkin from. I'm very proud of my little lumpkin. And you know what I got to tell your grandfather as he was passing away? Lumpkin, I got to tell him he was going to be a grandfather, and he passed away with that knowledge. And your grandfather was a very, very, very sweet man, a very gentle man. Whenever I get the chance or the courage, I'll be able to tell you a little bit about his rocky past. There were some things he could not say. I can leave you a breadcrumb. If you ever look up a foundation or a group called the White House Boys, the White House Boys. That's all you need. Marianna, Florida, White House Boys. Look that up. I'll have the courage to poke into that story one of these days. But right now, it's a reflection on how your grandfather lived. He lived within like a balance of two worlds, because see, your great grandmother Jeanette, she had 11 kids, and your grandfather Manuel was adopted by a man named Ted Giddens. So Giddens isn't really actually our last name. We're actually Leonards. But my father was a man who lived with two names. He lived with like the Giddens because he had no choice, because back then the education required you to have a last name, and usually I think Grandpa Ted, and that's how I refer to him, as Grandpa Ted. He pretty much did that for like tax purposes, and he did that for like schooling purposes, so they wouldn't get in trouble with the law. But Dad grew up in a pretty difficult time in the 40s. A lot was going on that time. You had the World Wars. You had a lot of scares back then. They were just now getting over the hangover of the Great Depression, because even though the Great Depression happened in the 30s, a lot of its effects still lingered on in the 40s and the 50s. But no, your grandfather, he was in the 50s. I actually have pictures of him I'm going to get from your Uncle Johnny, where your grandfather's got his cigarette pack rolled up in his sleeve, and he's got his hair all greased up like Elvis. Yeah, your grandfather looked like Elvis. He had that Elvis, dude. Thank you very much. I'm gonna have to get them 50s. I'm gonna have to get them 50s pictures from your Uncle Johnny. But your your grandfather used to love building motorcycles. He would build motorcycles, and he would, oh man, bless him, like this was before I was born, but he had a nasty wreck on a motorcycle where he broke his leg. The motorcycle got shattered all to pieces. So what does my dad and your grandfather do? He rebuilds it. He ends up putting the motorcycle in a competition. Your grandfather was also a very, very acquired seaman. He knew how to pilot a boat. He knew how to be on the waters. He would sail from here to the Bahamas to South America. He was so great on the boat. That's how he met my mother. He would sail from shore to shore. He knew how to just use, sometimes they didn't have all this internet or navigational equipment. My old man would just wing it by his hands and by the charts. They'd have like charts and maps on board, and that's how they would get along in the water. Your grandfather was also a trained pilot. He used to fly planes. He used to fly single-engine Cessnas. He would fly. He had at least over 2,000 or more than the required flying time that a pilot would need. Your grandfather was a man of many, many talents. He also would paint. He was a master painter. This man knew everything there was about like a motor. He could fix anything, and I'm glad that he at least shared some of his knowledge, because some of my fixery and some of my know-how and ingenuity comes from my father, and I'm just so pleased to have him while I did. I'm currently making other stories in the works. I do a lot of programs and a lot of content, but this one's definitely focused on my children, because I have that responsibility of parenting from afar. I know someday things will change, and I hope to change for the better, but this is a positive message and a positive story, especially one I want to leave in the laps of my children, especially if even those are the only views that I net, then I've done my job. There'll probably be a part 3. Right now I'm focusing on whether or not this loose format, because forgive me if the first one did seem a little robotic, is because I did have to use a script, and I feel like sometimes the script gives the story some structure and it gives it some guidelines. Oh, there's my little looter right there. Yeah, my little baby. I love my little girlies. Oh, and that one, I think she lost a tooth. This is, but it's like, when I'm making this little slide presentation, this little story right here, you know who I feel like's in the co-pilot seat right alongside me, looking over my shoulder? Your grandfather. And he's smiling at these pictures, and he's like, oh, slow down, son. Oh, I need to get a better look at that shot. You mean to tell me those are my grandbabies? Yes, Dad. Oh, you mean to tell me that's you taking trips to go see them? Yes, Dad. That's me doing my best to go see my kiddos, whether it be on a Greyhound bus, whether it be on a Mustang headed to Colorado, Loveland, little zany antics from a little nine, little Miss Skickerface, my little babies. My dad would be laughing at the silliness about every time I visit my little babies. I like to get a shot of them on the horse there at the park in Loveland, next to McKee Medical, where they were born. Babies. It's like your pop-pop sitting right here over my shoulder. I love telling these little stories because I miss my babies. But your grandfather, he would have been real pleased. Your grandfather would have been right along with the adventures. If he was still around, he'd be right there with me, and we'd be telling right along with the stories. And he'd be like, yeah, that's my crazy little son right there. There's one. There's one right here. There's your dad right here. There's your Pop Manual. There's your Uncle Tommy. Rest in peace, Tommy. There's Johnny, your Uncle Johnny. There's my nephew, little Tommy. That's his son right there, Tommy. And there's me during my phase. Got my skateboard over there as always. Gotta have that for sure. This is Thanksgiving, but Dad would have been proud. Dad would have been extremely proud. This is one of your grandfather, and this is one of your grandfather right here. There's your Uncle Tommy. There's your Uncle Johnny. There's your dad. There's me learning how to ride a bicycle. I remember that day as it was yesterday. But I love you girls, and as always, I'm going to come at y'all with a part 3. Especially, see if I can't dig up some more photographs. A little bit of some Florida living over here. We got a iguana. I'm always seeing them here. But as always, this is just a love letter from a father telling the story about your grandfather. If you have any questions, you could always reach out to me. And I love you girls. Big hugs, big kisses, and big squeezes as always from the Manbaer. Same pig time, same pig channel. And I'll come at y'all with part 3. That's 3 kisses for 3 special people. Wink, wink. Love, love.